Well, good morning from Washington, D.C. Indeed, a great deal of positive sentiment here at the IMF World Bank meetings, Alicia, in terms of the projected growth of the world economy this year. 3.6%, they tell us, next year up to 3.7%. But what we are hearing from the hierarchy of both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund is that countries need to use this time, this period of relative harmony to build resilience, whether you're talking about future financial shocks, which will come, whether you're talking about building resilience in terms of natural disasters, which we're seeing not only in South Africa, but the Caribbean, the United States, the Asia Pacific, and around the world, and mitigation towards issues around climate change. To talk about this and other issues that are on the table here in Washington, I am joined, as you correctly pointed out, by the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Patricia Scotland. Baroness, a warm welcome and thank you for your time. What do you make of this positive sentiment we're seeing in the world today? Should we be excited about it? We do come from tough times. What's your sense and reading of the situation?
Well, I think it's a moment where we really have to focus on the things that we've agreed on. If things are looking up, we need to look really creatively as to how we deal with the Sustainable Development Goals, how we respond to the new dynamic which is present across our world in relation to climate change, and how do we deliver that Paris Agreement. For small states who face an existential threat in relation to climate change, that has meant the end of their income. If you look at what's happened in Barbuda, the whole country has been devastated, the population has had to be evacuated. If you look at what's just happened in Dominica, which is the country of my birth, the whole country has basically been decimated. 90% of the roofs are gone, people's workplaces, people's homes have been decimated. So these realities, these new climatic shocks have to be something that we take into account, because this isn't about fiscal probity and rectitude. You can be as fiscally sound as you like, but when a hurricane of the magnitude that hit the Caribbean hits, there's nothing a population can do.
And this is why we're hearing the message from the leadership of both the IMF and the World Bank that there is this need to build resilience. Mitigation is so important. I think you spend so many billions of dollars or pounds in terms of recovery. That is money that really should be spent on prevention.
Yeah, and this is talking about mitigation and adaptation. We in the Commonwealth are trying to develop a more regenerative model of development, which will take into account the Sustainable Development Goals, which very much reflect the Commonwealth's Charter, because the 16 clauses of the Charter are reflected directly in the SDGs. We're looking at how we build and amalgamate those plans with the plans that we need to make in relation to climate change, and how do we help to mitigate and adapt in a way that will make us more resilient, which will make us able to regenerate our countries in a way that will give us sustainability. I've been talking about how we put the wealth back into Commonwealth, but also how we put the common back into wealth, because what we're seeing here at the IMF is, yes, there has been growth, but that hasn't been universally the experience of all countries. So how do we make that better? How do we contribute to making sure that we are able to face these problems? The world is facing some Goliath-like problems right now. Right. And I hope that we in the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth Secretariat will be pooling together to create that perfectly weighted stone to put in David's sling, so we bring those Goliath-like problems to heel. Just
to quote Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, she basically talks about how we need to use this period of harmony. While the sun is shining, we need to fix the roof. Of course, we were just making the point that a lot of people don't have any roofs right now.
But I think this is a real moment for comity, for solidarity, because the world has been able to come to an agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals. We know what we need to do on climate. We know what we need to do to reverse the impact of all these assaults on our global family. So the question is, what are we going to do now to make sure that the reality that so many of our citizens are facing, which is dire, is addressed? And I think it's a question of, do we have the will to do it? And as Christine says, we need to do it now.
We also we hear from the leadership of the IMF that 75% of the world economies are growing, 25% of them are not. And the reason for this is because some of the bigger, more developed economies have been investing in their humans. And some of these countries that are not coming back faster as we see this recovery is due to a lack of human capital, skills, investment. How do you see that playing out, given the struggles that some of these poorer countries are facing anyway?
I think it's a question as to how we pull this together, because there is a huge amount that we need to do to invest in the human capital. If you look at the Commonwealth, we have 2.4 billion people. 60% of those people are under the age of 30. So we've got a huge number of young, vibrant, intelligent people, but we need to invest in them. So we need to invest early. If we don't invest now in that youth bulge, then we deny ourselves real development and wealth in the longer term. So this is a moment where we should come together. We should be looking at how we use innovation and make sure that no one is left behind, because there is growing now a digital divide between those in the developed countries and those outside. So we've been talking at the finance ministers meeting here in the Commonwealth as to how we bridge that divide and what do we do to be able to take advantage of innovation.
South Africa, which is a Commonwealth member, let's use that as an example. I think growth forecast for this year is 0.7%. Statistics South Africa just came out with a figure that around 30 million South Africans out of a population of around 55 million live around the poverty line in South Africa. How critical are those figures in terms of political division, possible unrest in the future? What's your reading of societies where there's such a great deal of inequality?
I think it's really incumbent upon us to analyse how that has occurred and what do we need to do to create the stimulus to turn it around. We're going to go to the Law Ministers' Conference in the Bahamas, the Commonwealth coming together. How do we share? How do we create the tools? How do we enable this change to take about? We're looking at science. So, for example, South Africa and the UK have come together in the Newton Project. South Africa has some brilliant scientists, and so coming together with others to create the new paradigm, to take the opportunities on innovation, to share those opportunities and really understand how we move that population through and how we bring a greater degree of equity and well-being. And that's what the Commonwealth is about, sharing best practice, sharing innovation, brainstorming together and helping each other to get where we need to be. But it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take commitment, and I'm hoping that the Commonwealth is raising its game. We've got the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting coming next April. We've got 4 themes. We're looking at prosperity, we're looking at sustainability, we're looking at fairness, and we're looking at how do we create this business. There's a lot for us to do, but I think we can do it.
Sounds like a tough job, Baroness Patricia Scotland. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Patricia Scotland is the current and first woman Secretary General of the Commonwealth. Alicia, apparently you have a question for me.
Yes, I do. Sherwin, just on some of the things that I picked up that you two were discussing there, the Paris Agreement, which of course we do know that Donald Trump called an utter and complete embarrassment. How is now the US championing this in view of the latest stance by the president?
Well, fortunately for Patricia Scotland and members of the Commonwealth, the United States is not a member of the Commonwealth, so they can also almost go around him, if you will. But what we are hearing from officials in the United States, whether you're talking about business people, CEOs, mayors of cities, governors of states, particularly the state of California, which is has the 6th largest economy in the world, is that we don't need the White House to implement some of the parameters that are set out in the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So Americans are doing it by themselves, and their message is that we do not need President Donald Trump, Alicia.
Very interesting indeed. That is Sherwin Bryce-Pease, live to us from Washington, of course, at the IMF World Bank meetings that are taking place there in Washington.